This episode of Touch MBA is brought to you by Prodigy Finance, the leader in education loans for international postgraduate students. Visit prodigyfinance.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey guys, Darren here. Welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. It's great to have you here with us. Here on the show, we interview admissions directors, students, and alumni from the world's top business schools to give you a peek behind the curtain of what these schools are all about, what they're really like, and of course, how to get in. This week, I spoke with Ricardo Fernandez, who is the head of business development from Prodigy Finance. Now, Prodigy is a sponsor of the show, but I've been wanting to do an episode on financing your MBA for a really long time. I know this is a challenge for many listeners, especially those of you from developing countries. I saw it myself when I was a director of MBA admissions for a top school in Singapore. And our students from India, from Indonesia, from Thailand, from Vietnam had trouble securing competitive loans. Getting an MBA is a huge investment. So Ricardo and I discuss, different options you'll have to finance your education. And we'll also talk about how Prodigy is innovating in this space. Ricardo also graduated from Insead in 2006 and worked as a management consultant for many years before getting into the startup space and most recently, Prodigy Finance. So I also think it's interesting to get his perspective on the value of an MBA 10 years down the road and what he has found have been the biggest benefits. We discuss what to look for in an MBA network and whether MBAs are relevant or necessary to succeed as an entrepreneur, as Ricardo has been an investor, an advisor, and a CEO of different startup companies. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Also, just a reminder that if you need school selection help and if you're having difficulty shortlisting schools you'd be competitive at that fit your interests, go head over to touchmba.com to get some free school selection help. And now, my conversation with Ricardo. I'm really excited for this week's conversation. Ricardo Fernandez is Prodigy Finance's head of business development, working between Madrid, London, and New York. And after getting his MBA from Insead, he worked in management consulting for 8 years with companies like Accenture, BCG, and KPMG. He then shifted his focus to consult for startup companies in the financial tech space and joined the Prodigy Finance team in 2014. So what a background to talk about international student loans, but also the Insead experience and the benefits of that as well. So I can't wait to speak more with him. Ricardo, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
So yeah, I thought we'd split this conversation into two parts and first talk about Prodigy Finance and the work you guys are doing in the international student loan space. So could you first give us kind of a big picture overview of what options international students have to fund their MBA educations? I mean, this is obviously a very big part of the process that I think more applicants need to consider.
This is the number one question that people have when they get accepted into an MBA or basically any master's. How am I going to fund this? I mean, they have an amazing opportunity to change their life, and most times they're limited in terms of the money to be able to pay for these tuitions. We're talking about tuitions that are in the $30,000 to $60,000 plus living in a foreign country times 2 years. So we're looking at between $100,000 and $200,000 many times to do some of these top masters and top MBAs. So yeah, I mean, if people have not thought about how they're going to fund their MBA, they should first of all not be applying. So that would be my first tip for anyone. Think about how you're going to fund this. And then, surprisingly enough, there's actually a lot of different options. You just need to spend time. You need to talk to people. You need to do your research. You need to talk to the school. You need to talk to different alumni and really prepare for this life-changing experience. So, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about Prodigy Finance afterwards, but the first thing that everyone should look at is using their savings. I mean, you're not going to be accepted right then when you start working. You're probably going to have a couple of years of work experience, and you're probably going to be thinking, about doing your GMAT, doing all your essays. While you're doing that process, be thinking about how you can save. Even, an additional $20, $30, even $40,000 can go a long way when doing a master's. So try to, add a little bit of money every month. Don't be thinking about, your pension or your retirement, but think about, that extra $1,000 a month, I could definitely use it for savings. So, and just so everyone's aware, like the number one way for people to fund their MBAs and their masters is by using savings. And then when you start researching, I mean, you realize that there's actually a lot of scholarships available. For example, the top business schools in the US, they have about 40 to 50 different scholarships available. Some of these are based on a region that you're from, that you're living in. Some of them are based for certain characteristics. Some of them are based on need. Some of them are based on merit, some sort of association. But take a look at it. If you go into, for example, Insead's website and you take a look at all the scholarships, you'll see about 50 different types of scholarships that are giving there every single year. So that can definitely be another, big chunk to complement the paying for this MBA. And then, another huge chunk, especially with people with large families or very connected to their families, is family and like some sort of family contribution. I mean, it's a life-changing experience. Most of the family will support, and even another extra $10,000 to $50,000 in many ways can complement that money. And so family contribution. Don't be shy about asking your family. Trust me, you'll be able to pay it back, and I'll talk a little bit more about the opportunities afterwards doing your MBA. But that's a perfect way, to complement your tuition amount. And then, I mean, surprisingly enough, there are banks out there. Obviously, some countries more than others give you options, but sometimes, with co-signers, you can find you can find some local bank. You can try to find some sort of mortgage, be able to connect it to your bank, and be able to get a $20,000, $30,000 loan from some of the local banks. Unfortunately, most developing nations don't have that many opportunities. I'm talking mostly here about, American students traveling, like studying abroad or studying in the US or European citizens. But surprisingly, I mean, there are a few little options. And before talking a little bit about Prodigy Finance, which obviously fits within this space of loans, the last one, which we normally see about 20% to 25% of students taking, are actually company sponsorships. It obviously, ties you in for 2 to 3 years. But if you're able to get some sort of sponsorship from your company, maybe it's not 100%, maybe it's 20 to 50%, you should make the most of it. It's a double-edged sword, obviously, because if you have it, you're not going to have the opportunities to change jobs, change countries, which is many times what people are doing an MBA for. But you got to think about the wider picture. So even though I've given you, a ton of different solutions and opportunities here, the reality is that most of these fit for European and American citizens. If you're coming from many countries in Asia, definitely African countries, Latin American countries, the opportunities with scholarships and savings are very limited because you're probably not going to have a lot of money that you're saving, and your banks are not going to be able to help you. So based on this, 10 years ago, a couple of my classmates at Insead basically saw that it was kind of unfair. Why should an Indian or Nigerian student who is going to Insead, who is making, $8,000 to $10,000 before going to Insead, but is actually competing against the same jobs that the Americans and Europeans are getting either in the UK or US or basically all around the world, but they're not able to get loans because in the home countries, nobody will give them loans. But they're getting the same jobs, the same employers, the same salaries. So based on this, they basically created Prodigy Finance. And now, after a 9-year journey, giving loans to more than 80 universities, expanding from giving loans to MBA students now to masters in engineering, to LLM students, to masters in public policy, and growing in a lot more universities in the next 12 months. It's pretty incredible, like just, one little idea how it can grow. But basically how the idea came about is because there was this huge issue, especially for the developing nations. And they thought, who would better understand this issue? And basically they realized that the alumni would understand, because they had been going through the same issue. Alumni from India, from China, who studied 20, 30 years ago, who potentially have the savings and have the capacity, would realize that investing in these students is actually a very, very good way to help students and actually get a pretty nice return between 4 and 6% on a very secure investment. So they launched Prodigy Finance, and the way that they got the initial money was basically crowdfunding the loans to give out to students. So very, very innovative for back in the day. I mean, this was before Kickstarter was ever born, before Funding Circle was ever created, before any of these crowdfunding platforms. Obviously, it took a long time to prove that the model actually worked. But after lending $1 million 9 years ago and continuing now with another $1 million, $2 million, Prodigy Finance lent close to $100 million last year to students from over 100 nationalities in about 60 universities. So a huge, huge, huge growth. And the way that we're different is that we're basically treating students the same independent of their home country. Basically using this model that I was just discussing, understanding that, that person, it doesn't matter what their background is, where they're coming from, they're actually competing with the same jobs that people from developed nations are getting. So why shouldn't they be able to get the same loans? And that's how Prodigy Finance has been growing. 70% of our loans are going to students from developing nations. And this little idea from Insead now extending to over 60 universities, which is pretty amazing.
Gosh, there's so much I'd like to unpack there. I mean, just to give our listeners, the idea of what's going on here, it's, if you are, say, working in Vietnam and your salary is less than $1,000 a month, but then you get into a great MBA program, say that's in Europe or Asia or in the US, and you're competing, with your peers and getting similar salaries, that would seem like a big risk, wouldn't it, to banks?
Yeah, completely. And banks, they still think we're crazy doing this. I mean,
this is what I want to get into. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Cameron, the CEO founder, when he first started the company, his initial idea was basically to get money from banks. He was like, well, I can prove that these students, are getting the same jobs. They have the same salaries. We should be giving loans to them. But banks, we could share more and more data. We could prove to them they could not get it. And that's why I think this whole change in financial services that we define as fintech is really picking up right now, because banks, first of all, banks are not capable of using the technology they have to really extend worldwide their reach, and they're not able to understand some of the changes that are happening. So what we've built is obviously a predictive model where we can estimate based on algorithms and based on data how much students are going to be able to make in the future, so we can actually give very, very, very conservative credit decisions to students. And obviously, within that, we built a very strong credit model and a legal model and basically a whole structure where it doesn't matter what nationality you're from or where you're actually living, but we can, collect on that loan without too much of a problem. I always like to give this example of myself. So I'm a U.S. citizen and I'm a Spanish citizen. I can go to the US and, get a credit card for $10,000, $15,000. I would have no problem getting it. I can get a loan in Spain. I can rent a house in the US and I would have zero problem. No one would check. They would just check my credit score, et cetera. It would be no issue. Now, someone who, is, let's say, more senior to me in my consulting companies where I used to work in the past, but only has that Spanish passport, they go to the US on, let's say, a secondment and they're working there for 1 or 2 years. They would not be able to get a telephone without, have someone sort of guarantee or just be prepaid. They would need to prepay 6 months of their lease. They definitely would not be able to get a credit card. They would have a hard time, opening up a bank account. All these issues. And what is the difference between that person and myself? Realistically, just because I have a US passport and because I can, be chased in some sort of global way. But if you develop the process to be able to analyze people independent of where they are in the world, there should be no difference. Actually, that client is probably going to be much better than me, because he's not an entrepreneur. He probably has savings. He's probably going to be investing in stocks and funds. So it's the lack of of sight of some of these banks and just trying to fix all the problems that they have. So there's a lot of these little companies, I mean, maybe not so little in our case anymore, that are just identifying these gaps and holes, and we're solving people's problems and basically giving credit all around the world. It's fascinating, and I mean, and what's very beautiful about my day-to-day and what I do is that we're actually having an amazing social impact for people. So our loans, like, you don't need a collateral, you don't need a co-signer. You don't need to put your house up. And it's a very easy, 20-minute process to apply online. You just need to upload some documentation. And, the advice that I give to, I talk to students every single day that I give to them is, if you get accepted into, the top 100 schools in the world, your chances of being able to attend because you'll find money are actually very, very good. I mean, you just need to get accepted into one of these top schools. It already demonstrates how amazing you're going to be. Yeah, so for all the listeners out there, don't be shy about applying to these top schools. If you get in, the filtering mechanisms to get into these top schools are already pretty amazing. You will be able to find your funding. Obviously, you'll need to work hard at it. You need to do your research. You need to try to look for sponsorships, but you'll definitely be able to complement it with a loan from Prodigy Finance at these top schools.
Wow, that's really amazing. Because when I was an admissions director back in Singapore, it was so difficult for our international non-Singaporean students to get loans. They would need a cosigner to do that, or the rates back at home, especially those from developing countries, were sky high. So one thing I'd like to ask you about the loans you guys give is, could we get a little bit more into the specifics? You mentioned that there's no cosigner required. What are the rates generally like, and in terms of repayment periods, what is that usually like? And are those very different from bank loans, for example?
We obviously try to give loans as competitive as possible as we can. Our cost of capital obviously is much higher than banks, because the people, just so all the students out there or future students or hopefully future loan takers from Prodigy Finance are listening right now. Our money is actually coming from the alumni from the school, the actual school, wealthy individuals, family offices, people actually investing in this pool of students, in these students. So they're getting a pretty nice return, between 4 and 6%. So our cost of capital is not like 1%, like a lot of banks right now. So our rates range between 5 to 7%, depending on the profile of the individual. They're normally 10 to 15-year loans. The beauty about it is that you don't start paying until 6 months after you graduate, which is one of the big differences with a lot of European banks that give you, a 5 to 10-year loan, but then you need to start paying while you're in a school. Like, we understand if a student is studying, they don't have any income, they cannot be paying. And actually, what we see is that most students prepay their, no prepayment penalties, which is obviously something key. Just so you get an idea, the average loan term for our loans is actually about between 5 and 6 years instead of 10 years. So students prepay. Think about it. You finish in one of these top MBA programs. You get a nice signing bonus. You move to the university. The first thing you want to do is to get rid of your loan. And we encourage prepayment. We encourage you to use your signing bonus to get rid of it. But yeah, they're very, very attractive. Aside from no cosigner and we don't want to put any problems. We disperse it directly to the university. So, you don't even need to worry about it on your side. Like, we send it directly to university so they can, do all the tuition payments and all the issues there. And it's very, very simple. It's what banks should really be doing. We talk about this all the time. It's very hard to work in the financial services industry. There are just so many complexities, but we're very focused on one single problem, and we're doing it pretty nicely. And the beauty about it is that, we can lend to countries from all over the world. It's not just, your European and your US students being able to get loans, but, some African students that would literally have no other option. And these are talented individuals that some are making, as you said, $1,000 a month, and, they're not able to save up even a little bit of money, but maybe they can get a scholarship, some sort of, other financial aid, and they can really complement it with a loan from us. So we've really changed the dynamics. And from a, school diversity point of view, one of the key things that you were mentioning before is that, admissions consultants really want to attract an international group of individuals, because if you're in a class and everyone is type A profile, your experience is going to be, I would say, a little shitty. While if you're all of a sudden with type A, B, C, D, F, G, and then from all different nationalities, from all sort of backgrounds, you're going to learn so much about yourself, about the world, about other people. And that's what really makes a truly unique MBA experience. Looking back at some history when the financial crisis hit, there were quite a few American universities that had loan programs with some pretty big banks like Citibank and Bank of America. And they actually had to cut these because banks would not want to lend to international students anymore. So there was a big drop in number of international students during 2008 to 2011 in terms of percentage. A lot of European MBA programs actually picked up in terms of number of international students. But over the last few years, with us being in the mix and just some other opportunities that people are having, there's been a nice uptake in terms of international students. And obviously, it's really critical for the diversity of the class.
Yeah, and I think Prodigy is also taking a big bet on business schools themselves, right? And the power of that MBA degree. One other thing I'd also like to talk about more is that community aspect of Prodigy that you mentioned, because actually when I went to your site, I was looking, how could I invest in these loans? And it appeared to me that investors can invest in, for example, alumni from their school. Or is it also students from their home country? Are those like the two ways they could invest?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can invest pretty much in any university that we're lending to. But yeah, the main concept is, once you join the Prodigy Finance community, you're going to be part of that community forever, and that means we're going to help you find a job. If you have personal problems, we can manage your loan in some sort of way, give you a few months grace period. We will work in a way to best be able to manage your personal situations. And the virtuous cycle that we call it is, a university, they basically do the hardest filter for us. They basically, accept a student. Once a student accepted, they've already given them the check mark. So you have your schools that are really doing that filtering for us. Those students, that are taking our loans and then are, giving back to the community. And then eventually they're becoming investors. So we actually had last year our first students like that turned into investors, which is a beautiful way of seeing the full cycle, where someone that really understands it, because we were able to help them be able to go to business school, now is actually investing, and it's very important. They're actually investing in making money. If you look at right now European or even US deposits or very safe bets, people are making luckily making 1% on fixed assets that they're investing in. And we're giving, pretty nice return, and, you're helping the community. So there's a big chunk of this whole community. And it goes back to the whole network that one develops when they're an MBA program. It's obviously one of the key things when doing an MBA. So definitely we're trying to encourage that as much as possible. We're working it. We're still obviously a very young company. We've grown now to about 85 employees, which is great, split between New York, London, and Cape Town, actually. The reason for Cape Town was because our founders, two of the three founders were South African, so a big part of the base was started in Cape Town. It's a beautiful story. It's so nice reading some of these, feedback that we get from students, and just how grateful they are. And hopefully, every single one of these students, can become a future alumni. Even though we're still young, we're already getting our first few investors coming from alumni, which is a great, growth story there. That's
awesome. So, can applicants or students that are taking loans from Prodigy, do they get to meet more MBA alumni? How else are they part of the community?
Yeah, so we have actually two types of activities that we do. So the first one is we connect different students that are, want to be involved in the community. So, we could connect, for example, a student from Columbia Business School that took a loan from us with, someone from UCLA or someone from Insead or from LBS. We're more than happy to connect that, and we actually encourage a lot of this networking. We have a program called Ambassadors that we help a lot of these students. And then what we do a lot too, which is actually very interesting, and there's two winners here, is we connect investors with the actual students. And so what we do is we sometimes do mixers where we actually combine the students and investors after they obviously started. And you think about it, these students are very curious, who invested in them and who has helped them do their MBA. And actually, they want to get jobs from these people because most of the people, were in their similar situation of 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And they're probably in very strong positions. And the investors are craving for the talent that is coming out from these top MBAs. So, being in the same room for someone that they would love to be hiring, because the number one challenge that every single company has in the world, and especially a startup, is finding top talent. So being able in the same room, it's a very nice initial connection, and someone, that are coming from abroad that has a different view. Yeah, so a lot of these different investor events have been very, very attractive. As I said, like we incorporate a lot of the feedback that we get from people, from investors and students, and just if any of you guys have out there listening, like any advice of how we can improve and, connect more people, like we have the perfect platform to be doing it. So feel free to, share your opinions and ideas.
Very interesting. And I'm sure seeing who's investing in you makes you want to repay your loan. At least it would make me want to, put a little added pressure on me to get that done, the more personal it is. Any last tips for our listeners on how they can best finance their MBA educations?
First of all, do your research. It's so important. The same as you're preparing to, get a perfect 800 on your GMAT or, write those amazing essays and get the best recommendations and filling out your vacation. Do your research about you're going to finance. There are more options out there than you can even think of, but it just takes time. They're very regional. They're based on different characteristics, but definitely do your research. And then, apply. I mean, not only to Prodigy Finance, but there's other loan options out there. Like you should try to competition as a loan provider. Obviously, you want all your students to take your loans, but competition makes us better. It improves our processes. It improves rates for students. So, we're happy to have competition out there because the more people that are realizing that, they can take a loan to do their dream, the more like people will come and apply for loans. So from what we've seen, competition actually makes us better. You just need to have the best product out there. That so far, we're able to compete with the best and if not be the best out there.
Just one more question based on that research advice. So at the very beginning, you mentioned make sure you have the savings, right? To be able to afford one of these top-notch programs. Would you have any guidelines in terms of roughly, obviously it's going to vary between applicants, but roughly what percentage of the tuition you think that applicants should be able to knock down with their savings or potential scholarships or family contributions or company sponsorships, as you mentioned?
A good number is that you should be looking to pay for your living expenses with your own savings. It's a very easy calculation. And actually, we set our loan program individually with each school. So there's some schools that actually don't want to lend more than tuition or don't want to lend more than tuition minus deposits because, they want the students to have some skin in the game, which we completely agree with. Like we don't give any student 100% of what they're asking for in terms of the cost of attendance. So if the cost of attendance is, $100,000, we would never give a loan for more than $80,000 because we also want some students to have some skin in the game. 20 to 40%, depending on how expensive the living expenses are, is something that you should be looking at. And if, for example, you don't have a great salary where you're not able to save, like definitely look for the family contribution. If not, try to look for the scholarship. Try to look for the company helping you out. There are different ways, but you need to bring some skin in the game. If not, it's going to be tough. No one's going to give you 100% because they want you to be involved in it too.
Well, great. Keep doing the great work you guys are doing. And I think so many international students, I'm sure, are really glad that you guys are in the space and helping them out, especially those from the developing countries, as you mentioned. If we could now turn the spotlight on you, Ricardo.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Because you have a really interesting story. I wanted to learn more about international student loans, but since we have you here, again, you went to Insead and you graduated in 2006, correct?
Yep. I one-year program, started in 2005, and graduated in 2006.
You worked for some big name consulting firms before getting into the startup scene. So I was wondering, looking back at your pre-Insead career and your post-MBA career, 10 years after, what's the biggest benefit do you feel you've gotten from Insead and maybe your MBA in general?
Anyone that studied and has gone 5 to 10 years after their MBA will probably tell you, and if not, they're lying, that the biggest benefit is by far the network of people you've met. Maybe you don't realize it, the first couple of years after your MBA, but 5 to 20 to 30 years afterwards, it's the network that you've grown. So, my personal circumstances, I'm your typical Insead student, if there is a typical profile of an Insead student. But before living in Fontainebleau in Singapore doing my MBA, I lived in 5 different countries. I grew up all around the world because of my father's job. I'm an engineer, which probably won't come to much surprise, but 40% of MBA students are engineers. and I was your typical person that wanted that business experience, wanted to get into that world, but wasn't too sure. So I'm like, oh, well, maybe an ABA is the perfect way. And then the international exposure that Insead has was obviously perfect for me. And people would tell me, oh, you're going to learn a ton. I mean, I did. I mean, I didn't know what a P&L, a profit and loss statement was before I went to Insead. Definitely, I learned it at Insead, and I learned a lot more things. But the things that you remember most now are, the people that you've met, the network, and especially as you become an entrepreneur, and especially as you grow in your career. The last 3 or 4 jobs or projects that I've started have been through Insead connections. The people that I meet are a lot through the Insead connections. So without a doubt, I mean, obviously, you learn a lot, but it's the network of people that you meet afterwards, which, it's people that are thinking the same as you, that have the same issues, that have the same curiosity in many ways, that are all around the world. So you feel like kind of at home. You may have feel kind of an alien in the past wanting to do all these international things, and all of a sudden going to Insead, you're like, oh wow, there's people and they're like me too. So it's fascinating there. Anyone, I mean, actually any MBA, I would definitely encourage. It's a life-changing experience.
Yeah, I really encourage my listeners to look at, for example, rankings of MBA alumni engagement. I think that's like really, really important. How much people love the experience and how willing they are to engage with students. But, one question I think people might have about the Insead network and MBA networks in general, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts. Do you think the breadth is important? Because obviously Insead, graduates a huge number of students each year, like close to 1,000, I think. Whereas other MBA programs, perhaps have much smaller class sizes, 100, 200 people. In terms of that balance between engagement and breadth, the stereotype is that if you have a smaller class size, they tend to be more engaged, right? Because they know more people in their class and it feels like a smaller community. And I'm wondering, I'm sure you know a lot of other business school alumni from different business schools, whether you feel like one of those is more important?
It's a very good question. I mean, it's tricky. So at Insead, I mean, definitely, like it's along with Harvard, the largest number of MBA students that graduate every single year. I mean, the beauty about Insead is that students are all over the world. I go on a business trip, I don't know, to Thailand, and I share a comment on my Facebook page along with Insead students, or just on an email chain that we have, and there's probably another student out there, which is absolutely crazy. While in some of the other schools, obviously you don't have that international exposure, but at the same time, and that has its downfalls. I mean, for example, if you want to get into finance, I would much more encourage you to look at a Wharton or an LBS, which have an alumni that are a lot more focused in the finance sector. Insead obviously has that international exposure, has a lot of people that go into consulting. It's a double-edged sword because you have the opportunities to reach out there, but then if you want to be very specific in one subject, you should really research it. And some universities are better than others in different organizations. Like, for example, Duke MBA, has amazing people that are connected towards Apple and other product-specific companies in tech, because there's a lot of alumni that went to Duke that actually are in Apple right now. So there's a lot of connection when it comes to that from the MBA program. So depending on, I don't know if people are, really know what they want to do after their MBA. They say they do, but let's be honest, like most people don't know what they want to do. It's tricky there. And then related to having too many students, ultimately you're going to have your 50 close people and maybe 250 network that you're going to talk to, like even if there's 1,000 in it. So if you go to, a smaller program that is 200 students, you're going to be close to all your 200 students. What's key though is not just your year, but banking on people from other years. And if you have a very intense relationship and very intense experience, you're going to be able to connect with people that have the same experience, even if it was like 5 or 10 years afterwards. And they're going to help you. And they're going to love to talk about, those old stories when you were at Insead or Harvard or Columbia or HKUST. Like, they're going to talk about those experiences. And that's an automatic connection and trust. In many ways, it's a trust symbol going to many of these MBAs. But yeah, do your research. I mean, very, very important. Do your research. What city do you want to live in? Because people, they do the MBA for two main reasons from what I see. One is to change careers, and the other one is to change geographies. So for example, if you're a European and you want to go live in the US because you want to get a US experience, obviously do an MBA in the US. If you want to go into finance, probably Wharton would be your best bet. If you want to go into marketing, Kellogg has had an amazing tradition. So if you want to go into tech and something related to that, like Stanford, if you're lucky enough, is obviously your number one choice. So do your research before doing that. If you want to have a more international experience, definitely Insead. There's some amazing schools like IE, like LBS, like Oxford, like ESA, and some amazing Asian schools too now. They're really growing, like HKUST and CEIBS, that are getting more and more international students and with a huge Asian focus. So, you're going to have a competitive advantage, period, by studying in Asia there. So do your research. My one comment, if everyone remembers, like, do your research about what MBA program you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge investment of time, money. And like you said, that network is going to be with you for the rest of your life. So which one do you want to buy into? One other question I had was because in the past couple of years, you've been working with a lot of startups. You've been an investor, you've been an advisor, you've been a founder, you've been a COO, I saw on your LinkedIn profile. And I think one question a lot of my listeners have, because there is this movement towards entrepreneurship. It's this question of, do I need to get an MBA if I want to be an entrepreneur? And at Insead, I heard that over half of Insead graduates start and run their own company at some point in their career. So I'm kind of wondering, what are your thoughts there? Having been through that Insead experience, having been involved in all parts of the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Spain and abroad, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
As I said, I was kind of your typical Insead profile, coming from lots of different countries, having lots of experience abroad. I'm also your typical, consultant and entrepreneur profile of an individual. I mean, I got this advice. It was very interesting when I was doing interviews at Insead for B.Eng Consulting. I met the Spanish guy that was, I think, almost a partner at B.Eng, and he's like, all consultants are entrepreneurs that are scared shitless and they don't want to become and are too scared to be entrepreneurs. And it really stuck with me. I was like, I was actually quite young. I mean, I did my MBA when I was 25 years old. Yeah. So relatively, the average age at Insead was 29. I was like, oh, what's this guy talking about? I mean, I really want to be a consultant. I knew a little bit what consulting was. I don't think as much as once I actually started working at Boston Consulting Group, but it really stuck with me. And it's actually true. So Insead is the largest MBA program where people end up in consulting, because it's full of people that are really scared to become an entrepreneur, because it is scary. I mean, going into something where you don't know what kind of salary you're going to make, you don't have uncertainty in your day-to-day. You never know there's the glamour of working at an amazing company where you're probably going to be working even more than in a consulting company. So
you got student loans to pay off.
You have student loans.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I should have said that the first thing. I mean, one of our big things is obviously, we want to encourage as many entrepreneurs to come out of their MBA programs. But obviously, I mean, people need to pay off their loans. So it's a double-edged sword. But yeah, actually, Insead, has the highest number of consultants. But over the years, as people, start becoming more comfortable, they have some savings. They actually, a lot of them end up becoming entrepreneurs. And I would say I went to my 5-year reunion, and maybe about, one out of every 5 or 1 out of every 4 was doing something in entrepreneurship. And now I would say probably about one out of every 3. And some have gone through several experiences. And I'm pretty sure, after 15 years, when I go to my 15-year reunion, it would probably be about 50% that are started a company or are very close to in a new startup or something. So it is that maturity aspect and feeling comfortable and knowing what you're doing, which kind of reached me about 4 years ago when I kind of left consulting. I was in that situation where I said, okay, it's a moment to risk it now. I mean, I didn't have kids. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. I had my savings. And I would never, I don't regret it ever going through that process. I mean, I had some amazing moments. Obviously didn't make as much money as I would have wanted to, but now I'm in a very sweet position. I mean, with one of the fastest growing companies I've ever worked with in a very beautiful sector. I mean, connecting, education and technology and growing at a tremendous rate, which, looking back, consulting where I was telling people what to do, now I'm actually doing what I would have told other people what to do, which is a lot more fun. So, definitely, I think there's a big chunk of people at Insead, after a few years and after some thinking about what they want to do in their life and feeling more comfortable in themselves, and, after going through that shock, which is any MBA experience and learning about yourself, they end up in entrepreneurship. One of the things that people start asking me or students start asking me is how valuable really is an MBA? I'm probably not going to say something that, is going to encourage people to apply, but it's the truth. You have certain symbols that you can put on your CV, on your experience. And now, with LinkedIn and everyone using LinkedIn in the corporate world and actually the startup world, you can make that flashy out there. And from a symbol point of view, having worked at a Google or a Facebook is probably just as good as, having a symbol of studying at Insead, at Harvard, at Columbia, at LBS, at any of these schools. it's just as prestigious, just as complicated to get in. And you're like, oh, wow, this person can get their stuff done because they've gone to one of these places. Now, what definitely you will not be able to get by not having done an MBA is the network of people that you meet at an MBA. And if you're able to leverage that network of people, because it's people that are thinking alike, I mean, you're not exploiting the network, but you're helping one person, one day they help you, another day they help you, or you help others. Like that experience you will never have at having worked at a Google or Facebook. But the reality is that it's going to be just as complicated. My entrepreneurship activities, when I started a company and when I sold a company, I joined another one and I sold it, and now I'm a Prodigy, were a lot tougher than any MBA experience. I mean, what I learned of the complications of the day-to-day is just 10 times more complicated than an MBA experience. But yeah, I mean, having said that, definitely you can learn a lot and do a lot of things and, get those seals on your CV. But the network of people, and most of all, the life-changing experience, you're not going to get if you don't do an MBA. And for a lot of people, I mean, I believe you only live once and you're going to make the most of it. And I encourage everyone. I mean, I encourage actually all the more junior people in my team and my company now that I'm managing to do an MBA. I'm shooting myself in the foot because I'm like going to be losing these people. But I realize how much it impacted me and how much I want them to have the best for themselves. It's a life-changing experience in any way.
Interesting. One other question, maybe this is a selfish question on my part, but I'm just wondering from an investing standpoint, because we read a lot in the media that a lot of people in the startup industry are kind of MBA averse. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, you see both. I mean, obviously a lot of this, sells newspapers and sells, clicks. You have your typical VC that says,
start a debate, right?
Yeah,
start a debate.
Yeah.
Let's get more views. Let's get more clicks.
Yeah, I don't want any MBA. For every MBA, I deduct money from the valuation of the company. And then there's, VCs that say, I will never invest in a company that doesn't have an MBA because, they can manage a group of tech people. That being said, I think the perfect combination for, your perfect startup team is, I would add an MBA. I think it gives some sort of calmness and, some sort of structure that is many times needed with, the tech background. I do think the tech is more important. And when you do see companies and, CEOs of companies or big startup companies, more than 50% of them are started with someone that has a tech background and is the tech guru from that. But I do think there's a lot more there is a lot that can be added from an MBA. If you want to get into a startup and you're expecting consulting or very high salaries, you're going to be disappointed. So it's that fine balance. Like, how much do you want to get into it? Knowing, let's say you don't even have the student loans, so just how much you could be making in other places too. So it's a very, very fine balance, but it's not all about money. It's about finding something that you like to do. I'm making less money than I was making 6-7 years ago, but I've never been happier in my life. And I would never go back to what I was doing in the past just because to make some money. I'm lucky, obviously, to be able to say that right now. But it's true, huh?
Wow, I think that's a great place to end our conversation. Ricardo, thank you so much for your insights. I really had a blast talking
my pleasure.
through these questions with you. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Hope I can help a lot more students out there, achieve their dreams. It's an amazing experience. So all of you guys out there that are listening, give it a thought to apply for an MBA.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.